Welcome to episode 2 of Hard Compound, an American perspective on Formula One. Son, what are you drinking?
Today I got El Sully. It's a Mexican lager from 21st Amendment Brewery. It's crisp, it's refreshing, it's just what you want when you're sitting on a beach. I would definitely recommend it to anybody that's looking for a Mexican cerveza.
Sounds awesome. I am having Oberon from Bell's Brewery in Michigan. One of my preferred beers. It's refreshing, nice lager, little bit of hops. I think it's as close to a universal craft beer as you can get. So, what did you think of last week's race, Styrian, in Austria?
Yeah, last week's race was pretty fun. I think kind of par for the course as far as most races have gone so far this season. There wasn't too much craziness or too much excitement. You kind of expected the top four to finish in the top four. But, I think this season, the midfield battles are a lot of fun to watch. We got the two Ferraris up there battling, obviously with the AlphaTauri. The McLarens are kind of always in there. Even Alpine is getting in there. So, those battles are definitely fun to watch. I think this last week wasn't any different. And I think, there are a few guys that really proved how good they are and how good they're going to be this season. You see guys like Norris and Verstappen in that race was just, so much better than anybody else.
Yeah, I think Verstappen, is both the best driver on the grid, and I think he has been actually for at least 2, 3 years. You forget how young he is and yet how long he's been in F1. But certainly, I think this year he's far and above everyone else. That includes Hamilton, that includes Alonso, Leclerc. But the Red Bull car, I think, is at best just slightly ahead of Mercedes, and more realistically, I think, especially over the season, still the number 2. I think if Verstappen was within striking distance, I think his talent, his intensity, his focus, that'll get him the championship. But we'll see if the Red Bull team can give him the car that he's going to need. But yeah, as you said, Mercedes and Red Bull are ahead of the pack. It's sort of 1, 2, 3, 4 every race is what you should expect. The real fun is those mid teams and in the starting lap, which was tough last week because Leclerc took out Gasly in the first lap, and Gasly had a good qualifying. The car was ready. I doubt he was going to podium, but he certainly could have finished, 5 or 6, let's say. So that one was tough. But I do agree that, not just from last week, and they're staying in Austria with the COVID still happening around the world. They're staying in Austria, so they're going to have another race there again this week. I have a feeling that the top 4 will be just exactly as they were last week. We'll see, but the fun is definitely in that middle section. But what do you think is going to happen, or what do you think is going to happen for the second go round in Austria?
Yeah, I think it's pretty hard to realistically believe that the podium isn't going to have 2 Mercedes or 2 Red Bulls on it. It's like those 2 teams, 3 of those 4 drivers are going to be on the podium. At least it seems that way, unless some crazy stuff happens with some garbage Pirelli tires again. But yeah, it just seems like as long as they have reliability or no reliability issues, the 2 Red Bulls and the 2 Mercedes are going to be 30 seconds clear of anybody else.
Yeah.
So I don't see that changing. I'm really interested to see, if the Ferraris can show race day pace again. It'll be interesting to see if Gasly, coming back from last week's disappointment, if he can come back and finish high up in the points like he kind of seemed like he was going to last week. And then, my focus is going to be on guys like Ricardo and Ocon, guys whose teammates drove really well last week, but didn't have good performances themselves. So we'll see if guys like Ricardo and Ocon, like I was saying, can finish high up there.
Yeah, they have the car. Norris has proven that. Alonso has proven that. So
Hmm.
Ocon and Ricardo should both at least hit the top 10, I think. I don't think that's too much to ask. Maybe a little bit on Ocon because I think even with Alonso, that Alpine slash Renault car is, you can say mid pack, but it's sort of at the back of the mid pack.
Mm-hmm.
But realistically, they should both do better. I think fans should expect more from both Ocon and Ricardo this week. Now, changing gears somewhat, we always talk about Lewis Hamilton, and for our podcast, we have an American perspective, and we're always promoting F1 to our friends, our colleagues, our fellow Americans. I often hear comparisons of Lewis Hamilton with Tom Brady. Tom Brady has 7 Super Bowl rings, and I believe Hamilton has 7 titles. I don't want to disrespect Hamilton. I don't want to take anything away from him, but it's not the same. Hamilton has had an easy pass for the past several years. When I try to explain to American friends why 7 F1 titles is not the same as what Tom Brady has done with Super Bowl rings, it's like, again, I hate to take anything away from Hamilton. He's been so good and so consistent for such a long time. That's such an amazing achievement. But he's basically had a car that the worst he was going to do was come in second place.
Mm-hmm.
I try to tell my American friends with Tom Brady, it's as if NFL got rid of the salary cap because every year Tom Brady's New England Patriots or then Jacksonville could not spend any more than Green Bay or Buffalo, for example, or Detroit Lions. The NFL adjusted schedule so that the top team, New England, this year Jacksonville, has to have the hardest schedule. Well, for F1, Hamilton's team has spent far and away more than anyone else. And instead of being put at the back of the grid, he gets to go to the front of the grid every race, essentially. The top team in the NFL gets the last draft pick. Mercedes can bring in whoever they want. So it isn't quite the same. And I know that's controversial, but as great as Hamilton is, I'm not going to say there should be an asterisk there next to his titles, but I think since 2014, the worst he was going to do was second place. So that's a bit different than, any other driver or comparing him, let's say, to Tom Brady or to Tiger Woods or Wayne Gretzky. So I think we have to sort of have that perspective that F1 is the top in racing. It has the best teams, the best cars, the best drivers for the most part, but it can be a bit of a stacked deck for the teams at the top, for the Red Bulls and the Mercedes.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I think Hamilton is an unbelievable driver. He's proven that throughout his career, but I think you do need to take some of the statistics with a grain of salt and not just say, "Oh my gosh, he's has every record for everything now. He must be far and away the best driver of all time." You know, going back to the Tom Brady comparison, it's like if Tom Brady only had to play one other team every single week, right? If he only plays the New York Jets every week, well, what's going to happen? He's either going to be the first place team or the second place team in the league. It doesn't matter.
Right.
Or if you say something like, Hamilton has Verstappen to deal with. Verstappen's such an incredible driver, like he beats him every week. That would be like saying, in his prime, Tom Brady played Peyton Manning every single week, except Peyton Manning was on a college football team. The Red Bull Mercedes like fight, Red Bull was so far behind for so long that even Verstappen couldn't get close to him. And we're seeing now, as the cars are getting closer and closer in pace and quality and reliability, Verstappen is starting to, maybe he's not quite surpassing Hamilton, although he's up in the championship right now, but he's going toe to toe with Hamilton every single week. And I think, I just don't know if if there should be a comparison between, or if there is really a good comparison between Hamilton in F1 and an American sport that you can think of. It's hard to think of a specific player or athlete to compare Hamilton to. Motorsport is kind of interesting in that it has a lot of technical aspects to it, whereas other sports are pretty much exclusively based on your athletic ability. So, I just don't know if you can make a really solid comparison between Hamilton and an American athlete.
Yeah, for me, I think it's so technically demanding, intellectually demanding, and physically demanding.
Hmm.
I think for F1 drivers, the closest comparison might actually be a quarterback in the NFL. The sort of the technical, the physical, the intellectual, that's all required for that. But hats off to them. Hats off to guys like Hamilton, Alonso, Vettel, Raikkonen. It takes so much to become an F1 driver. It's nearly impossible to become one. That to compete at that level and to do it for years, for a decade, even Ricardo now. I mean, it's pretty amazing. Hats off to them, but I do think, because whenever I hear American friends bring up F1, the only thing they ever think about often is Lewis Hamilton, and oh, he has 7 titles, isn't that just like Tom Brady? So I thought, well, I'll use that as the explainer.
Yeah.
So speaking of great drivers who've been there for years, one thing it's fun watching Alonso. It took him a few races to get to really start getting the most out of that Alpine. And in the last few races, he's actually surpassed Ocon, who's been there for a bit. But it sort of reminded me of when McLaren got back into F1 and Alonso. I mean, they were paying him well. He was giving them all his knowledge, but that was brutal to watch. I mean, even the Williams teams of the last few years haven't been as bad as those first few years of McLaren's return, when you thought at least one car not only may not finish, it may not even start.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, those Honda McLarens were just unbelievably bad. I mean, I guess bad in terms of reliability, right? If they actually finished a race, it was kind of like, oh, they might actually score points here.
Right.
The issue was whether or not they would end a race, finish a race. And yeah, I just remember being so like appalled at at the reliability of those Honda McLarens, because I mean, you want to see those drivers. I mean, Fernando Alonso and Jensen Button on a team, that's a fun team. That's an exciting team. And two world class veteran drivers. And they like dicked around all the time because they couldn't finish a
It
race.
was terrible.
What else are they going to do? I think those two did as much as they possibly could for that team. And I think full credit to Zach Brown for coming in and turning that McLaren team around. And, now they've got a young driver in Norris and an experienced driver in Ricardo, who hopefully can start putting in some good performances. And they have a really solid team and a really good shot at coming third in the championship this season.
Yeah, Zach Horner has done an amazing job. I mean, he's come in, he's put together a fun team, he's put together a highly technical team, 2 drivers that everyone loves, Ricardo and Norris. He's bringing in the sponsor money hand over fist. And it really has been great to see McLaren just really rise up from the ashes of a few years ago.
Hmm. Hmm.
And now they're not number 1 or 2, but they're right there. They're number 3. They're, kind of the front of that mid pack. It's been great to see, and it's which brings up another, misfortune, I suppose, in that Honda said they're exiting F1, which is just,
Mm,
uh,
mhm.
I mean, I don't know what that means for McLaren, for Red Bull, for others, but it's just been so great to see McLaren improve so much over the last few years. And yet, here in the US, we get to see Indy every week, and Honda dominates.
Mhm.
So, it's unfortunate that Honda has decided to pull out.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I think, it's really good to see, like you said, McLaren, an iconic team, an iconic brand, really come back and start really performing well again as an F1 team, as a constructor. And I think, I'll get to Honda in a second, but talking about, Americans making an impact in F1, Zach Brown has come into McLaren and has, turned that around. I think maybe that is where, Americans can do the most for the sport. Maybe it's not going to be drivers, but maybe it'll be team bosses, somebody in that role who can bring in sponsors and get the social media teams going so that that brand can transcend all over the globe.
That's a great point because I forgot, Zach Brown is an American. He's done such a great job putting the team together, such a great job getting the sponsor money. And you wonder because there are no American drivers in F1. There may never be. It seems like they all go into Indy or I suppose NASCAR.
Mhm.
But maybe that's where Americans can have the biggest impact in F1. Guys like Zach Brown. Or, I mean, we can have this discussion for another episode, but I think F1 is owned by Liberty Media,
Mm.
which was
Mhm.
dominated by US cable TV interests, which hopefully does great things for the sport and bringing it into the US, making it more popular in the US. But maybe that's how Americans can sort of get into F1 is team bosses overseeing the teams, sponsors, social media, television rights,
Mhm.
building the
Mhm.
audience.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. I mean, Bernie Ecclestone kind of drove Formula 1 for a long time, and you just think now with it changing hands, maybe the European and especially British dominance of Formula One, maybe that doesn't come down too much, but maybe we get new perspectives. And I think as an American who is an avid F1 fan and knowing very few people in the States who know anything about F1 or are interested in F1 at all, I think it's an exciting prospect. Like you said, that Liberty Media is kind of in control at this point.
Yeah, so we'll see. I'd love to see an American driver, someone let's say from Indy make the leap, but until then, American money, American business sense, American social media, maybe that's gonna be how America impacts
Mhm.
F1. So our next segment, what's wrong with and what's right with. So we'll start with what's wrong with. What's wrong with Williams? It's been so bad for so long. At last week's race, Russell, who I think is certainly a top 10 driver, I'd be willing to say he's a top 5 driver on this grid. I don't I don't know for sure, but I think you could make that case. It looked like on that track with that car, Russell driving it, they were finally going to get points. And I can't remember the last time Williams got points. And then, of course, bring the car in. There's an issue, and you could say, "Oh, it's happenstance, misfortune." But every week, it seems the same thing. And they've had new ownership because
Mhm.
I think Claire Williams and the founder, Frank Williams, they gave up control. It's owned by, I think, some private equity firm. You would think new money, and yet it seems the same old Williams. Why do you think that is?
Yeah, I'm trying to think of who the last person to score points for Williams was, and quite honestly, it might be Valtteri Bottas. But yeah, it's such an abysmal team. Maybe that's a little harsh, but they seem like they've accepted that they're going to be bottom feeders for, you know, basically since the turbo hybrid era. And I just, I think Williams is such an iconic team that it was kind of sad, I guess, that the family decided that they were going to relinquish control or majority control of that team. But it also is exciting when you think about the prospect of new money coming in and some rule changes, I think, happening next year to see if this new ownership can get something out of that car. If the money that they've put in can actually give returns, I think that would be really cool to see Williams back up in the points, actually racing. George Russell never gets a chance to race, right? We saw him once in a Mercedes and he should have won that race if not for a total screw up by Mercedes. You just hope that he gets the chance to actually race. And quite honestly, I think it's hard to judge, the other drivers that come into Williams. You think of Latifi, he's constantly sitting at the back of the pack. I mean, we've seen him in other divisions, right? And he's a fast driver. There's no doubt that he's an exceptional driver, but we don't really get to see how good he can be because he's sitting at the back of the pack in that Williams.
Yeah, I always think George Russell must have made some deal with the devil. I mean, make me an F1 driver. You can have my soul. I mean, what's a better job than F1 driver? Rock star maybe. Mick Jagger might say rock star, but F1 driver, I think, best job in the world, let's say. Say, okay, we're going to make you an F1 driver, George, but we're going to give you a car that could never win, that can never even show up in the top 10. So, sucks for George, I suppose. Now, on a happier note, what's right with Gasly? Gasly has been really, ever since, not since they moved him from Red Bull to AlphaTauri, but I think the combination of that crazy race that he actually won,
Hmm.
and then when Albon, fairly or not, got booted, I think Gasly realized, that number 2 spot at Red Bull is an impossible task. I'm just going to do my best. I'm not going to beat myself up over it. And he has just really, in the last year and a half, done such a great job.
Yeah, he's been, I think, one of the brightest spots, one of the brightest drivers, at least this season, and at the tail end of last season, I think too. Yeah, it really does seem like, from that race win that he got last year in Italy, that he has just gained so much confidence and he, brings it every single week. And he seems like, I mean, well, last year it was Kvyat, right? And this year Tsunoda is his teammate. And he just dominates them every week in every aspect of the weekend, from qualifying to the actual race. And it's not just his teammates, though. I mean, tell me where you think the AlphaTauri should be. And I think he gets it 3, 4, 5 places ahead of that. It's pretty remarkable, I think, what he has achieved in the last year and a half. And quite frankly, I don't know exactly why, but I think he just has gained some confidence in an F1 seat, and he hasn't given that up. And I think, props to him. He's been really incredible this season.
Yeah, I think, it's so tough being Max Verstappen's teammate. Perez has a bit of a support system. He had a long history coming in to the Red Bull team. He has a sponsorship. He basically has nothing to prove. So I think it's been a bit easier for him. But everyone else, since Verstappen, Verstappen's the alpha dog on that team, and I think Christian Horner likes it that way.
Mhm.
And everyone else has gotten booted. Ricardo, Albon, Gasly. But Gasly's the one where, I think he sort of found his footing. He knows that car. He's getting the best out of it. Like you said, last year, even though Kvyat put up a fight, he beat Kvyat throughout the year. He's doing the same with Yuki this year, although it's a different scenario because you have a new young driver. But I think, as much as I think Verstappen is really the best driver on the grid, what we're seeing Norris and Gasly do is just been pretty remarkable. Norris obviously has a better car, but those two younger drivers are doing just such a great
Mhm,
job.
mhm. Yeah, I mean, I'm just so impressed with Gasly this season. I think, you talk about Albon, and, I think he really got the short end of the stick on that deal. You think about, what if Albon got brought up to that Red Bull seat first and then halfway through the season kicked back down for Gasly? Maybe Gasly's not in F1 anymore, or maybe he doesn't have a seat right now as one of the 20 drivers on the grid, and Albon has his seat at AlphaTauri. I don't know if that would be the case, but sometimes you get lucky, and I think Gasly is making the absolute most out of that right now. I think he kind of knows that he is lucky to be in that seat, but he doesn't want to be lucky again. He wants to make sure that he's going to keep that seat and maybe move into a better team at some point.
Great point. Let's see. Next topic, F1 tech.
Hmm.
I hear from the few Americans that I know who follow F1, one of the things they don't seem to fully grasp is the notion of dirty air. So, why don't you explain to the listeners what the dirty air is?
Yeah, so dirty air isn't like unclean air. It's mostly has to do with turbulence, which is a term they use in fluid dynamics. It basically has to do with a Reynolds number, which isn't that important at this moment in time. But basically, turbulent air means that you're not getting airflow that's just kind of straight across your vehicle. So you're getting instead airflow that's kind of spinning around. There's this weird sort of flow that has like little cyclone looking things in it. And basically, that means that you're not getting the same kind of downforce produced by your aero package as you would with a laminar flow. And the turbulent air, the dirty air, is caused by a car running pretty close in front of you. And so it's pushing a hole through the air and causing the air on the back end of your car to become turbulent, and it circles around and just doesn't give the same kind of downforce that you would if you're not driving in that turbulent air. And so that means that it's going to be more difficult to brake and more difficult to hit your corners appropriately, and then more difficult to accelerate out of those because you're actually getting less grip from your tires. So it is really a big factor in your ability to pass somebody, is how quickly you can get by them. Otherwise, you're running in that dirty air and you're not getting any downforce, which means you're not getting any grip. And it just makes it that much harder to get past somebody.
Fascinating. Now, is the new designs, new rules for next year and going forward, aren't they doing something about that? Are they trying to mitigate the effects of dirty air, or allowing for design changes that sort of mitigate some of those effects?
I actually don't know too much about the rules changes for next year's Aero package, but I imagine that they want more overtakes. They want you to be able to get by guys better. That's good for the sport. It's an exciting part of the sport, right? And we've heard for years that it's hard to overtake. Guys make their cars as wide as possible, and it's hard to get by those guys unless you get a long straight, a long run at them, and are able to use your DRS. So I think that, yeah, next year with the rule changes, F1 is looking to make it easier to get by the cars in front of you, to pass, to overtake, because it's just an exciting part of the sport. And I imagine that the aero rules are designed to mitigate the effects of that dirty air so that it is easier to overtake.
So, speaking of overtakes, this week's race still in Austria. But before I get your predictions, let's talk who we think are the top 5 drivers this year. So, give me your first top 2. Who's doing the best?
All right. So, my top two this season, right now, at this point, I have to give number one to Verstappen and number two to Norris. Max Verstappen is just dominating every week. He's leading the world championship. He's pulling that Red Bull team up there and fighting with the Mercedes drivers every week. It's pretty incredible what he's been able to accomplish. And I think it's pretty clear at this point that he's the best driver on the grid. And Norris, I mean, we talked about him a little bit earlier, but he's a man on a mission this season. He has been 100% every race weekend. He hasn't missed a Q3 all season. He's been in the points every race this season, I think. And he is driving the wheels off of that McLaren. I've been really impressed by him, and I don't think anybody aside from Max Verstappen has been better this season.
Yep, I have the same top 2. I think Verstappen is the best driver on the grid. I think he's been putting on a master class. I think he's been getting everything he can out of that Red Bull and maybe more. And number 2, and it's been such a shock, a happy shock, but Norris, it really is. He's a man on a mission, like you said. I mean, I think it's now becoming embarrassing for Ricardo. You have this veteran driver, but Norris is showing him up every week. He's getting so much more out of that McLaren than we would thought possible. I think he's ahead of Bottas right now. I'm not 100% sure. I'm certain that won't last. The Mercedes car is simply too good that even Bottas won't lose out to McLaren. But it's just amazing what Norris has been doing.
Mhm.
So, what are your 3, 4, and 5?
Yeah, three, I have Perez. I think you knocked him a little bit earlier, but I have him at three, then Gasly at four, and Hamilton at five. So Perez at three, I just think, we've had several Red Bull drivers over the last several years that did absolutely, maybe that's harsh, but didn't do a whole lot to actually help the team. We kind of always knew that Red Bull was right up there or should be right up there competing with Mercedes. And, Verstappen was pretty much always there, and his other driver, his other teammate, was pretty much nowhere to be found most of the time. This season, Perez, I think, it took him a couple of races to get going, but right now, he's looked really, really good in the last several races. He won that one in Baku. I know it's a little bit fluky with Verstappen's wheel and Hamilton with the lockup on the restart, but you have to give credit where credit's due. He won that race, and he's been in the top, four in several of the last races, I think. So he's my number three. Gasly, we talked about what was going right with him. He's my number four. I mean, like we said earlier, he's just been on a roll in that AlphaTauri. He's got the confidence and the swagger to go out there every week and show up his teammate and put his car on the points as long as he doesn't get his rear suspension taken out by Charles Leclerc. And then I have Hamilton at five. Hamilton has been so dominant for the last, 7, 8 years now. And he still is a remarkable driver. He's been putting on a show this year, just getting beat out by Verstappen most weeks, but he has the second most wins of anybody this season. And, maybe I dock him too many points for being in the Mercedes, being in that car, but he still puts on a show every week, and he's been a really solid driver.
Yeah, Hamilton is my third, actually.
Mm.
I don't want people to think I knocked him earlier. Hamilton is one of the all time greats. And as you said, he's second in points this year. But I also think people are underestimating his drive. I compared him somewhat to Tom Brady, to Tiger Woods, these greats in other sports. Mercedes has been dominant for so long, and Hamilton has had it easy for so long. But suddenly we're in this season where there's another team that's at least close
Mhm.
and a lot hungrier. And Mercedes, I think, is at that point where they're realizing, their era of complete and utter dominance is coming to an end. And I think a certain sort of lethargy sets in on teams, on organizations. They've been at the top for so long and they know it's coming to an end and they just accept it. But to his credit, Hamilton does not accept it. And he is getting everyone on that team, I think, to focus on this year, not next year, to improve the car, to make it better, to not accept the end of an era, at least not yet. And for that, I think he deserves credit. So he's my number 3. My number 4 is Gasly. He has the privilege of being an F1 driver. There are only 20, and it's nearly impossible to become one, especially if you don't have a super rich father or super rich sponsors. He does not. And he is taking a mediocre car and fighting for points every race. And when you consider how he was just so unceremoniously dumped from Red Bull, I think it's pretty remarkable what he's doing. My 5th, partly out of nostalgia, is Alonso. He's on a new team. It's not a great car, but after the first few weeks, he's now figured that car out. He's getting the most out of it. He's beating Ocon, his teammate, and he still puts on a masterclass at the start of the race. I mean, I would definitely encourage any American interested in F1 to check out Alonso's onboards from the start of the race to see what he's doing.
Mm.
It's always remarkable to watch. So those are my top 5. So we're close. So let's close it out. They're back in Austria. What are your predictions for the race?
Yeah, I think it's going to be, we already saw, the outcome of the first race there. It's hard to see a whole lot changing. So I'm going to go and say that Hamilton takes the win, gets Mercedes back in the win column. But I think the Red Bulls are going to be right there, also on the podium. But I think Gasly coming back after a really disappointing race last week, I think he's going to finish top 5.
Nice. My prediction is the top 4 from last week will flop. So instead of Verstappen, Hamilton, I think it will be Hamilton, Verstappen, and then Bottas, Perez. So that's my top 4. Mercedes and Red Bull still taking the top 2, but Hamilton, Verstappen, Bottas, Perez. My crazy prediction is Williams, George Russell gets a point.
Let's hope so. That would be a lot of fun.
That would be awesome. I mean, George Russell, I admire him. He's such a great driver. I don't necessarily trust him. He has the look of the British fellow who sides with the Daleks against humanity. But he's an incredible driver. I do want Williams to succeed. And I think this is the race where they actually have a car that makes it to the end and he gets into the top 10.
Nice. Nice. I hope so. That would be a really, really fun weekend.
That would. All right. Well, that's it. We'll talk about the race after, and then we'll do it again. All right. Thank you, son. Talk to you soon.
All right. Bye.